My name is Warden-Prime Zethara Koss, and I have never lost a prisoner. In 31 years, commanding Installation Nora 7, the most advanced containment facility in 11 sectors of the Galactic Concordance, that number has always been my greatest pride. Assassins, terrorists, generals who tried to topple entire governments, all of them stayed exactly where I put them. Then a human arrived, short, calm, with eyes that swept my installation like she was choosing an apartment. 8 minutes after I closed the door of the most secure cell I have ever built, the internal communication panel emitted a signal. It came from inside the cell, and the message was, "Excuse me, what time is breakfast? Let me tell you how we got here." The transfer order arrived on an ordinary cycle with no special flag in the system. One detainee for temporary processing, pending concordance adjudication. Name, Sergeant Maya Reyes. Species, human. Planet of origin, Earth. Reason for detention, diplomatic incident at Station Vareth 9. Threat classification, moderate. I should have read the full report. I did not read it because, honestly, a moderate classification does not demand much of my personal attention. Nora 7 receives high-danger detainees. That week alone, I had a former admiral who had ordered the bombardment of an inhabited moon and a smuggler who had bypassed 14 different security systems before being caught. A human with a moderate classification was, in the hierarchy of my concerns, something close to an administrative formality. My deputy chief, Torren Vass, met me at the main entrance when the transport ship docked. Torren has 19 years of containment experience, and as far as I know, has never displayed anything resembling nervousness. When the ship's door opened and the transport team descended with the detainee, I noticed that the 3 escort officers carried the specific posture of people who are very relieved to be handing a responsibility to someone else. At the time, I did not pay attention to that. Maya Reyes came down the ramp with her hands contained in standard motion suppressors, devices that neutralize upper limb mobility with a localized force field. She wore a gray detention uniform that seemed slightly large for her frame, dark hair pulled back, short by galactic standards, which meant she had to tilt her head slightly upward to look directly at me. She did so without hesitation. Most detainees entering Nora 7 do one of 3 things: survey the structure with desperation, stare at the floor with resignation, or attempt to project a hardness they usually cannot sustain for more than 2 cycles. Maya Reyes did none of the 3. She looked at the 5-meter containment walls, at the security turrets positioned at the upper corners, at the visible force fields pulsing across the internal doors, and her expression was that of someone who had just walked into a moderately impressive technology museum. "How many layers of force field on the outer walls?" she asked. She was not asking me specifically. She asked the air, like someone thinking out loud. 4, I said, and immediately did not understand why I had answered. She nodded slowly. "And the atmospheric suppressors in the internal corridors, are those the Keth 7 model or the updated version?" This time, she looked at me directly. "Admission protocol does not include a technical tour," said Torren Vass, more firmly than I would typically use with a moderate classification detainee. I realized later that Torren had read the full report. Maya Reyes smiled. It was a completely neutral smile. No anxiety, no calculated provocation, no attempt to appear threatening, the way some detainees try as a defense mechanism. It was simply the smile of someone who is perfectly comfortable in the environment they find themselves in. That, I discovered later, is unsettling in ways that take some time to articulate. I escorted her personally to Cell Omega, not because it was protocol. For moderate classification detainees, the housing process is handled by Level 2 guards. I went because something in that woman's posture had activated a 31-year instinct I did not yet know how to name. Along the way, she attempted nothing. She did not test the motion suppressors, did not scan the exit routes with the calculating gaze that experienced detainees tend to have. She simply walked, looking at the installation with that quiet, methodical attention, like an engineer conducting a routine inspection. At the entrance to cell Omega, she paused for a second. She looked at the door. 40 centimeters of reinforced titanium, triple locking system, impact absorption on every internal surface. Then she looked at me. "Good engineering," she said, with genuine respect, as if complimenting a professional colleague. I closed the door at ZO 614. At ZO 622, the internal panel signaled. Torren Vass walked into the monitoring room, where I was reviewing security protocols for the detained admiral, and placed the communication log in front of me with an expression she had never used in the 19 years we had worked together. It was the expression of someone who is not sure what they are looking at. The signal came unmistakably from inside cell Omega, not from a detected device. The cell's communication suppressors block every known transmission technology. The signal was using the installation's own emergency frequency, the one reserved for cases where a guard becomes accidentally trapped in a cell during a system failure. Someone from inside had accessed the internal emergency frequency, with what I had absolutely no idea. I activated the response channel with a hand that, I note now, was not entirely steady. "Cell Omega," I said. "Identify the equipment used in this transmission." A 2-second pause. "Good morning, Warden Koss." Maya Reyes's voice was completely identical to the one from admission. Clear, calm, without the slightest tension of someone who had just done something that should have been impossible. "Sorry to bother you. I just wanted to confirm the breakfast time. I did not see anything posted in here." The silence in the monitoring room lasted 4 full seconds. Torren Vass looked at me. I looked at the panel. "How are you transmitting on that frequency?" I asked, and hated how much my voice sounded like someone asking a question they fear the answer to. "Ah, that." A slightly thoughtful pause. "It is a long story. Can I tell you over breakfast?" "Do." The next 40 minutes were the most professionally humiliating of my career, and I say that as someone who once had to explain to the Concordance High Council why a detained war criminal had somehow redecorated his cell using only the materials from his meal tray. We ran every diagnostic available. Torren Vass pulled up the cell's full sensor array: atmospheric readings, energy signatures, vibration detection, thermal mapping. Nothing. No device. No foreign material. No anomalous reading of any kind. The motion suppressors on Maya Reyes's wrists were functioning perfectly, confirmed by 3 separate system checks. The communication blockers inside cell Omega were operating at 100% capacity. According to every instrument I had, nothing inside that cell was capable of producing a transmission. And yet the signal had happened. I had the log. Torren had the log. The system had automatically flagged and recorded it with a little notification icon that I was going to be seeing in my nightmares for the foreseeable future. I called my head of technical security, Ovren Das. Ovren has more certifications in containment engineering than most institutions have walls, and he approaches every problem with the specific energy of someone who genuinely believes that all things have a rational explanation and that he personally will find it. He arrived in the monitoring room, reviewed the data for 6 minutes, and then sat very still for a moment that went on slightly longer than was comfortable. "The frequency she used," he said finally. "Yes. It requires direct physical interface with the installation's internal conduit network." He pulled up a schematic on the wall display and pointed to a series of lines running through the cell walls. "These conduits carry the emergency signal infrastructure. They are embedded 22 centimeters deep in the wall plating, behind the impact absorption layer, behind the titanium reinforcement. Accessing them from inside the cell would require..." He stopped. "Would require what?" Torren asked. Ovren looked at the schematic for another moment. "Tools we did not detect on admission. Knowledge of our specific internal architecture that is not publicly available. And approximately 4 minutes of uninterrupted work against a surface specifically designed to resist exactly that kind of interference." He paused again. "She had 8 minutes. The room was quiet. So she spent 4 minutes exploring the cell, I said slowly, and 4 minutes doing something that our admission scans said was impossible. That is one interpretation, said Overin, in the voice of a man who did not have a better one. I looked at the live feed from Cell Omega. Maya Reyes was sitting cross-legged on the floor platform, her motion suppressors still perfectly intact on her wrists, her posture relaxed, her eyes closed. She looked like someone meditating before a morning workout. There was a small mark on the wall to her left, approximately at shoulder height. It was so faint that I had to enhance the image twice before I could confirm it was there at all. A neat, precise abrasion, maybe 3 centimeters wide, made, as far as I could determine, with her thumbnail. I sat with that information for a moment. Overin, I said, what is her file classification again? He checked his tablet. Moderate threat. The transport team assessment notes. He scrolled. Subject displays, no aggressive behavior, cooperative during processing, no resistance at point of capture. He looked up. There is a secondary note added by the transport commander. Read it. He cleared his throat. Recommend reassessment of threat classification upon transfer. Subject is... He paused on the word as if making sure he was reading it correctly. Unusually observant. Unusually observant. I was going to send that transport commander a very specific message about the quality of his reporting, but that was a problem for later. Right now, I had a more immediate situation. I opened the communication channel to Cell Omega. Sergeant Reyes, Warden Koss. Her voice was immediate, attentive, as if she had been waiting. Good news about breakfast. I would like to understand how you accessed our emergency frequency. I figured you would. A brief pause. I am happy to explain. It is actually a fairly elegant vulnerability in your conduit architecture. You would probably want to patch it regardless. Another pause. Though I should mention there are 2 others. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. 2 others, I repeated. That I found in 8 minutes, she said, with absolutely no tone of threat or boast. The same neutral professional register she had used since the moment she arrived. I was not looking particularly hard. I was mostly just getting oriented. Torrin Vass, standing beside me, made a sound that I believe was her attempting to clear her throat and not entirely succeeding. Sergeant, I said, and I want to note that I chose my next words with the specific care of someone navigating an unfamiliar terrain. You are in a maximum security containment cell. Motion suppressors on both wrists. Communication blockers active. You are, by every measurable standard, secured. Yes, she agreed pleasantly, and yet you are transmitting on our internal emergency frequency. Yes. That does not concern you? A pause. Not the pause of someone thinking about the answer, but the pause of someone deciding how much of the answer to give. Warden Koss, she said, I have not done anything that compromises your facility's security. I found a vulnerability and I am telling you about it. That is professional courtesy. A beat. Where I come from, we call that a gift. I looked at Overin. He was staring at the wall schematic with the expression of a man reassessing several foundational assumptions simultaneously. Why are you being cooperative? I asked. Because I am not trying to escape, she said simply. I am waiting for my hearing. Escaping would complicate that considerably. A slight pause. Also, your facility genuinely is impressive. I meant that earlier. The triple lock system on the Omega door is the best I have seen outside of Earth's own installations. Another pause. Well, second best. I should not have asked. I knew I should not have asked. 31 years of professional discipline told me very clearly not to ask. What is first? I asked. The smile was audible in her voice. Funny story, she said. I built it. I want to be precise about the timeline of the following hours, because precision is important to me professionally, and because it is the only way to convey exactly how systematically my understanding of the situation deteriorated. At 07:00, I authorized breakfast delivery to Cell Omega, standard protocol for all detainees, regardless of classification. The tray was prepared by automated systems, checked by 2 guards, scanned for any material that could be repurposed as a tool or weapon, and delivered through the secure passage slot built into the lower section of the door. The slot is exactly 28 centimeters wide and 8 centimeters tall, large enough for a standard tray, not large enough for anything else. Maya Reyes thanked the guard by name. She had been in the facility for less than 2 hours, and she already knew the guard's name. I checked the admission records. His name was not spoken aloud at any point during her processing. It was displayed briefly on a badge during the walk through the internal corridor. She had read his badge in passing and retained it. I noted this and added it to what was becoming a privately maintained mental file that I had labeled with the specific creativity of someone who is mildly unsettled, simply the human. At 08H45, I received a second signal from inside Cell Omega. This one was not on the emergency frequency. It was on the administrative channel, the internal line used exclusively by senior staff to communicate between offices. It requires a 6-digit rotating access code that changes every 4 hours and is known only to personnel with level 4 clearance or above. I stared at the incoming signal notification for 3 seconds before answering. "Good morning again," said Maya Reyes. "I finished breakfast. It was excellent, by the way. The protein compound is better than I expected. Would you pass that along to whoever handles catering?" "How?" I said, and I want to acknowledge that this was not my most articulate moment. "Are you on this channel?" "I found the 3rd vulnerability," she said. "I mentioned there were 2 others. This was the 2nd one. I wanted to demonstrate it rather than just describe it. More convincing that way." A brief pause. "The 3rd one I will simply tell you about. You do not need a demonstration for that one. Honestly, that one you want to fix today." Torin Vass was already on her own communicator, summoning Overin Das back to the monitoring room. Overin arrived 2 minutes later, looked at the active channel indicator showing Cell Omega connected to the administrative line, and sat down in a chair with the slow, deliberate movement of someone whose legs have made a unilateral decision. "The administrative channel," he said to no one in particular. "The administrative channel," I confirmed. He rubbed 2 of his 4 facial sensory nodes in a gesture I had come to associate, over the years, with him encountering a problem that was reorganizing his worldview. "Sergeant Reyes," I said into the channel, "you mentioned the 3rd vulnerability. Tell me." "It involves your outer perimeter sensor grid," she said, "specifically the calibration overlap between sectors 4 and 7. There is a 17-second window every time the system runs its automatic recalibration cycle, where the coverage has a gap approximately 2 meters wide at the northeast junction. Not enough for a vehicle. Enough for a person who knows exactly where to stand and exactly when to move." The silence in the monitoring room was the specific quality of silence that happens when multiple people are processing the same unwelcome information at different speeds and arriving at the same unwelcome destination. "How do you know our recalibration cycle timing?" Torin asked. "I counted," Maya Reyes said. "The lights in my cell dim very slightly every time the system pulls power for the recalibration. Approximately 0.3% reduction in luminosity. Most species would not notice." A pause. "I am not most species." Overin stood up, walked to the wall display, pulled up the perimeter grid schematic, and started running a timing analysis. 30 seconds later, he stopped the analysis and stood very still. "She is correct," he said. "Sectors 4 and 7, 17.4-second window." He turned to look at me with the expression of a man who has just discovered a crack in a wall he designed himself. "I did not know that was there." "I know," said Maya Reyes gently. There was nothing unkind in her tone. That was somehow worse. I took a breath and made a decision that felt at the time like a significant professional concession, and which I now understand was simply the only rational response to the situation. "Sergeant Reyes," I said, "I would like to conduct this conversation in person." A brief pause. "Does that mean I get a second breakfast?" she asked. I brought her to the consultation room on level 2, which is where I conduct formal interviews with high-priority detainees. The motion suppressors remained on. 2 guards posted at the door. Torren Vass seated beside me. I want to be clear that I took every standard precaution, and I also want to be clear that I was becoming increasingly aware that standard precautions were a framework designed for a category of detainee that Maya Reyes did not appear to belong to. She sat across from me and looked around the consultation room with that same methodical attention. 4 cameras, she said. 2 visible, 2 concealed. The concealed ones are behind the ventilation panels on the north wall. The slight asymmetry in the panel screws gives them away. She said this not as a challenge, but as a simple observation, the way a person might comment on the weather. "Sergeant," I said, "I have read your file. The short version or the full version?" I paused. There is a full version. For the first time since her arrival, something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, something more like the quiet acknowledgement that a conversation has just reached an interesting point. "Warden Koss," she said, leaning forward slightly, her suppressed wrists resting on the table with complete ease. "What exactly does your file say about why I was at Station Vareth 9? I looked down at the report in front of me. Diplomatic incident. Unauthorized presence in a restricted zone. I had read those words 4 times since her arrival. They had seemed sufficient. They no longer seem sufficient. "It says unauthorized presence in a restricted zone," I said. She nodded slowly. "And did it mention what I was doing in that restricted zone?" It did not. I had not noticed the omission until this exact moment. Maya Reyes studied my face for a second with those calm brown eyes. "I was dismantling a weapons cache," she said quietly. Someone had hidden enough kinetic ordnance in Station Vareth 9's lower levels to take out the entire docking ring, 47 ships, crew and passengers. She paused. "I found it. I disarmed it. And then the Concordant security team arrived and found me in a restricted area with a disassembled weapons cache and no documentation of authorization because the operation was not supposed to exist officially." A small pause. It was a bureaucratic situation. The room was very quiet. "You disarmed a weapons cache," Torren said carefully. "It took about 11 minutes, Maya Reyes said. The last 3 were a little tense." She said this the way someone might describe a mildly complicated parking situation. I looked at the file in front of me, at the words diplomatic incident, at the classification moderate threat, at the secondary note, unusually observant. I thought about a man who had written that note and apparently considered it sufficient. "Sergeant Reyes," I said slowly, "what is your actual role? Not the file version, yours." She looked at me for a moment with an expression that was, for the first time, something close to direct. "Warden Koss," she said, "what I am is the reason your facility has 3 vulnerabilities you did not know about this morning and 0 of them by tomorrow." A pause. "If you ask me nicely, I want to note, for the record, that asking a detainee for help securing the facility that is supposed to be containing her is not covered in any operational manual I have ever read. I checked later. There is no protocol for this. There is no precedent in the Concordance Containment Authority's 200-year institutional history. There is not even a footnote. I was, professionally speaking, in entirely unmapped territory. And yet the alternative was sitting on information about 3 security vulnerabilities that a woman with suppressed wrists had found in under 3 hours while waiting for the administrative channel to produce a breakfast recommendation. "I want to be clear about something," I said, keeping my voice at the measured register I use when I'm making a decision I will need to be able to defend later. "You are still a detainee pending concordance adjudication. Your status does not change." "Understood," said Maya Reyes. "Any assistance you provide regarding facility security is voluntary and does not constitute a formal arrangement of any kind." "Also understood, and the motion suppressors stay on." She looked at her wrists, then back at me, with the expression of someone deciding whether to say something. She decided not to. She simply nodded. I chose, at that moment, not to examine too closely what that look had meant. Some questions are best approached gradually. I had Warden join us in the consultation room with a full schematic of the installation's security architecture. He arrived carrying a data tablet and the expression of a man who had spent the last hour in a profound professional reckoning and had come out the other side somewhere between humbled and genuinely curious. He placed the schematic on the table and stepped back. Maya Reyes looked at it for approximately 4 seconds. "Your primary vulnerability is systemic," she said, "not structural. The individual components are excellent. Your engineering is genuinely among the best I have encountered." She glanced at Overin with what appeared to be sincere professional respect. "But your systems were designed in isolation and integrated after the fact, so each one is strong independently, and the connections between them are where the gaps appear." Overin stared at her. "That is exactly how the facility was built," he said slowly. "The containment systems were designed first, the communication infrastructure was added in the second construction phase, and the perimeter grid was the final integration." "I know," she said. "I can see the architectural logic in the layout. The conduit routing gave it away." She tapped a section of the schematic with one suppressed wrist, the motion clumsy but deliberate. "Here, the junction between your containment power grid and your communication suppression network. They share a load balancer that was clearly added as an afterthought. Under normal operation, it is invisible. But if you introduce a minor oscillating frequency into the containment field, something well within the tolerance range that your sensors would read as normal fluctuation, it creates a harmonic interference pattern in the suppression network. The suppression does not fail. It just develops a very narrow, very specific gap." Overin sat down again. He had been sitting and standing so frequently in the past 2 hours that I had stopped tracking it. "How narrow?" he asked. "Narrow enough that you would never find it unless you knew exactly what frequency to use and exactly where to stand," she said. "Which means in practice it is not a vulnerability anyone would stumble across." A pause. "But it is the kind of thing someone with a specific skill set and a reason to look would find." She met my eyes. "Someone like the person who put that weapons cache on Station Verith 9. The room recalibrated around that sentence. "You think whoever planted the cache knows about this facility," Torrin said. It was not quite a question. "I think whoever planted the cache is sophisticated enough that any facility holding someone connected to their operation should be assessed accordingly," Maya Reyes said. "I am not saying they are coming here. I'm saying that if they were, they would find the same things I found, and they would not knock politely and ask about breakfast." I looked at her for a moment. "Is that why you flagged the vulnerabilities? You are concerned about an external threat to this facility?" She held my gaze steadily. "I am concerned about 47 ships worth of people who are alive right now because someone found that cache before it detonated. And I am aware that the operation I interrupted did not end with my detention. It got interrupted." A slight pause. "There is a difference." The weight of that settled over the room like a shift in atmospheric pressure. For the first time since her arrival, I was not thinking about Maya Reyes as a containment problem. I was thinking about the report I had not read fully, about the transport team's relieved postures, about the secondary notes scrawled by a commander who had apparently watched this woman work and could find no better descriptor than unusually observant, because the accurate descriptors were things he was not cleared to write in a standard transfer document. "Overin," I said, "how long to implement the fixes she has identified?" He was already making notes. "The conduit access point, 2 hours. The administrative channel vulnerability, 40 minutes. The perimeter grid recalibration overlap," he calculated briefly, 6 hours minimum. We would need to take the sector offline in rotation. "Start with the perimeter grid," Maya Reyes said, quietly, but with the specific directness of someone who has assessed a priority order and is sharing it without ceremony. Overin looked at me. I nodded. He left the room with his tablet and the focused energy of a man who had been given the rare gift of a problem with a clear solution. Torin Vass poured a glass of water and placed it on the table in front of Maya Reyes without comment. It was, I realized, the kind of gesture that bypasses conscious decision-making and comes from something more instinctive. Maya Reyes accepted it with a small nod of thanks. We sat in a brief quiet. "How long have you been doing this?" I asked. Not an interrogation question, a genuine one. She considered it. "Depends on where you start counting," she said. "Officially, 11 years. Unofficially," a small pause. "I grew up on Earth." She said it simply, as a complete answer, the way someone might say, "I grew up near the ocean," to explain why they know how to swim. I thought about what I knew of Earth, what everyone in 11 sectors knew of Earth. A death world by galactic classification, gravity 1.3 times the galactic standard, atmosphere dense enough to require physiological adaptation from any other species, apex predators on every continent. An evolutionary history so relentlessly competitive that the species it produced had spent the majority of their existence fighting one another with increasingly sophisticated tools, apparently because they had already domesticated or eaten everything else worth fighting. A species that looked to a casual galactic observer roughly the size of a medium-threat organism and carried, inside that frame, a lifetime of environmental conditioning that had no equivalent in the Concordance's records. "You grew up on Earth," I said. "The Northern Hemisphere," she said. "High-altitude region. Gravity slightly above the planetary standard." A pause. It was bracing. She said the word bracing with the affectionate tone that people use for things that shape them permanently and that they would not change. I looked at the motion suppressors on her wrists, at the cell she had communicated out of in 8 minutes, at the administrative channel she had accessed before her breakfast tray was cold, at the perimeter vulnerability she had detected by watching the luminosity of her cell lights fluctuate by 0.3%. I thought about the weapons cache, about 11 minutes, about the last 3 being a little tense. "Sergeant Reyes," I said carefully, "I want to ask you something and I would appreciate a direct answer." "I will do my best," she said. "The motion suppressors." I paused. "Are they actually suppressing anything?" The silence that followed was 3 seconds long. Then Maya Reyes smiled. It was the first smile since her arrival that reached her eyes fully, warm and entirely unguarded, the smile of someone who has been asked exactly the right question. "Warden Koss," she said, "I have been waiting for you to ask me that since the first corridor. I want to be precise about what she said next, because I have replayed it many times since, and I think the exact wording matters. The suppressors are functioning perfectly," she said. "They are doing exactly what they were designed to do. I have not tampered with them, and I have no intention of doing so." A brief pause. "I just do not need my hands to do most of what I have done today." Torin Vass set down her stylus with a small, deliberate click. "The transmission," I said slowly. "The administrative channel. Thumbnail on the conduit access point. As you likely figured out, the administrative channel required a slightly different approach. The rotating code cycles on a timer. The timer is tied to the facility's master clock. The master clock pulses at a frequency you can feel in the walls if you press your back against them and pay attention." She said this entirely without performance, just sequence and fact. I counted 3 cycles, calculated the rotation algorithm based on the interval pattern, and derived the current code. A pause. It took about 6 minutes. I spent the other 2 minutes finishing breakfast. Overend Das, who had returned quietly partway through part 4 and was standing near the door, made a sound that was not quite a word. "The algorithm is proprietary," he said. "It is not published anywhere in any form accessible outside level 5 clearance." "I know," she said. "I derived it from the pulse intervals. I did not need the documentation." She looked at him with that steady professional regard. "Your algorithm is actually very good. A less regular pulse timing would make it significantly harder. That is a straightforward fix." Overend wrote something on his tablet with the focused intensity of a man converting professional humiliation into productive action. I leaned back in my chair and looked at Maya Reyes with the specific attention of someone who is finally seeing the complete shape of a thing they have been examining in parts. "You could have left," I said, "at any point today. The perimeter window, the conduit access. If the suppressors are not the actual limiting factor..." I stopped. "You could have walked out." "Yes," she said simply, "but you did not." "No, because of the hearing." She held my gaze. "Partly," she said, "also because leaving would have meant leaving the vulnerabilities unaddressed. And I told you, the operation at Vareth 9 was not finished. It was interrupted." She paused. "Whoever placed that cache is still active. If they have a reason to come here, I would rather be inside a facility with patched security than outside one with 3 known gaps." I considered that. "You stayed," I said, "because it was tactically smarter." "I stayed," she said, "because 47 ships worth of people are alive, and I would like them to stay that way. And sometimes that means sitting in a room and answering questions and fixing someone else's perimeter grid instead of doing something more immediately satisfying." A pause. "I am not always good at the sitting still part, but I am working on it." There was something in the way she said it. Not a complaint, not self-deprecation, just the honest accounting of a person who knows exactly what they are, including the parts that require deliberate management. I thought about 31 years of containment, about the assassins and terrorists and rogue generals, about the satisfaction of a perfect record, about the pride I had felt walking Maya Reyes through those corridors this morning. I thought about how completely I had misread the situation and how that misreading was not a failure of my facility, but a failure of my framework. I had been asking the wrong question all day. The question was never whether I could contain her. The question was whether she was choosing to stay. "Sergeant Reyes," I said, "when is your hearing?" 3 cycles from now," she said. "Concordance Adjudication Board, Station Merath 2. A slight pause. "Assuming someone filed the correct paperwork this time, which is genuinely uncertain. I will make some calls," I said. She looked at me with a brief, quiet surprise, the first genuinely unguarded reaction I had seen from her since the admission corridor, and it was gone in a second, replaced by that calm composure. But I had seen it. "Thank you," she said, and meant it simply, without negotiation. I nodded. Then, because 31 years of professional habit does not dissolve in a single afternoon, I said, "In the meantime, you remain in Nora 7 under standard processing protocols." "Of course," she said. "Cell Omega. Naturally. Motion suppressors." She looked at her wrists and back at me, and this time she did smile fully, with that same warmth from before. "Warden Koss," she said. "I would not have it any other way." I walked her back personally, through the corridors, where she had read a guard's badge in passing and remembered his name, past the walls where she had felt the master clock pulse through the surface with her back and counted intervals, into Cell Omega, where she had spent 8 minutes finding 3 vulnerabilities that 31 years of my career had not seen. At the door, she paused. "The 4th one," she said. I stopped. "I'm sorry? There is a 4th vulnerability." She said it with the calm of someone completing an inventory. "I did not mention it earlier because it requires physical access to a section outside my cell, and I did not want you to think I had been outside my cell." The pause that followed was very long. "Had you?" I asked. She considered the question with what I can only describe as philosophical precision. "The suppressors were on the entire time," she said, which was a complete sentence that did not fully answer my question. I looked at her. She looked at me. "I will send Overin," I said finally. "Northeast stairwell junction," she said. "3rd step from the bottom. The resonance frequency of the structure creates an acoustic channel to the external sensor relay. You can hear the recalibration cycle directly instead of inferring it from the lighting, makes the timing considerably more precise." She paused. "Whoever designed that stairwell did not account for the load-bearing modification that was clearly added later. It is not their fault." She stepped into the cell. I closed the door. I stood in the corridor for a moment with the specific stillness of someone at the end of a day that has reorganized something fundamental. In 31 years, I had never lost a prisoner, That number was still technically correct. I walked back to the monitoring room, sat down at my desk, and opened a direct communication line to the Concordance Adjudication Board on Station Merath 2. While the connection was processing, I pulled up Maya Reyes's file, the full version, not the transfer summary, and this time I read every word. It took 40 minutes. When I finished, I sat very quietly for a long moment. Then I opened a second channel to the Concordance Security Director's office and requested an immediate priority review of the Vareth 9 incident, the status of the connected operation, and the current threat assessment for all facilities holding personnel with knowledge of the case. The director's aide asked me to describe the urgency level. I thought about a woman who had found 4 security vulnerabilities in a maximum security installation before lunch, stayed voluntarily because leaving would have been tactically imprudent, fixed 3 of them as a professional courtesy, and asked twice about breakfast. Tell the director, I said, that we have a situation that does not fit any existing classification. A pause. And tell her that if she has not yet reviewed the full file on Sergeant Maya Reyes, she should do that before we speak. The short version is not sufficient. I paused one more time. It was not sufficient for me either, and I had her in my building. I ended the call, leaned back in my chair, and looked at the live feed from Cell Omega. Maya Reyes was sitting cross-legged on the floor platform again, eyes closed, completely still, motion suppressors on both wrists. The picture of a cooperative detainee at rest. On my desk, the notification icon from the morning's emergency signal was still there. That small, impossible flag. A woman in the most secure cell I had ever built, 8 minutes after the door closed, asking politely about breakfast. I'd spent 31 years being proud of a record. I think, sitting there watching the feed, that I was beginning to understand the difference between a facility no one had ever escaped from and a facility no one had ever needed to escape from. They are not the same thing. They are not the same thing at all.